All right, hi everybody, and welcome back. Great to see all of your smiling faces digitally, of course. Here, Phil Nagy and Kit Nagy joining you from Nagy on Sports today with the first of kind of our reaction videos here that we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. Basically, continuing to just bide our time until the draft, so we can update our rosters and continue the sim action. So, first one because it's fresh. It's new. It's the new cut. It's the new wound. Is it the first thing we don't love about Andrew Berry? Lots of instant reaction. Lots of both sides of the coin being talked about. So I wanted to get Kit's side of the coin because I think it's a pretty darn smart side of the coin. So today we're going to talk about 98, Sheldon Richardson, and that's it. We're going to talk about a few of the things. What are they missing? We're going to talk about, obviously, the financial piece of it. We're going to talk about draft strategy coming out of the move and maybe moving into the move as well. And then kind of next steps, where are we at now? So that's all. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to be excited. So if you have any comments on the video, please toss them in there. More questions, other things you'd like us to do videos about. We're certainly open for that. We do have some other ones coming as well. So, Kit, welcome. How are we doing? First off,
I'm doing great. Always good to be talking to you. Football anytime. I love talking Browns. I love talking football, as you know. So happy to be
absolutely,
here.
absolutely. All right, well, let's jump right in. Sheldon Richardson, cut last week, um, fresh off the heels of the Clowney signing. Maybe they were connected, maybe they weren't. We'll get into that a little bit later. But let's start with Sheldon for this team. What had he done? Let's talk about what they are going to actually be losing on the field when 98 is not suited up potentially next year.
Yes, yeah, certainly. I think a lot of folks saw this as a bit of a surprise move, and certainly they could have continued right as they were and not made a single change to their roster and been very well set up, even in cap. And we'll get into some of the strategy and stuff here a little bit later in this video. But yeah, who is Sheldon? So first of all, he's 30 years old. Keep in mind, this front office does tend to like younger players, and 30 for a D tackle is not old yet, but it's starting to get towards that tail end of production that you can squeeze out of guys. Looking at what PFF thought of Sheldon Richardson at 30 years old for his 2020 season. So he was the number 47 defensive interior rated guy with a 68.7 overall rating. If you remember, that 68, we're kind of right on that borderline starter range there. It starts at 69 for starter, right? So we're just shy of that. In rush defense, he was rated the number 39 D tackle at 67.7. And then in pass rush, he was the number 44 at 66.1 rating for PFF. His stats tell an interesting story here. He was very much omnipresent through that D line, taking 920 snaps in the 2020 season. That's a lot. In those snaps, I think two things that really stand out in his stat line. The first one being 51 pressures. That's a lot of pressures production. So a lot of production in the pressure front, 6 sacks, 5 hits, 40 hurries to create those 51 pressures with 4 batted balls in that. So that's a lot of production, and we are very adamant on the channel here that it's not all about that sack number. That 6 is not the most important number to focus in on there, even though everybody loves to talk sacks. I mean, with 51 pressures, you're affecting the quarterback and the opposing team very heavily on that D line. There's a lot of production there, and that that translates in other ways, in other stat categories like defensive coverage grades, and for some of your secondary, because you're really helping them, and you're also helping the rest of your D line rush. And we saw that. We saw Myles Garrett clean up all kinds of pressure that started with Sheldon Richardson, right? That happens. It's not just Myles producing it all on his own. Sheldon was a big part of that. Continuing on his stats, 48 tackles, 16 assists, only 5 misses for a miss rate of 7.2%. That's pretty low. And I think the other one that really stands out here for stat wise is 34 stops. That's a very good number of stops that he managed to rack up in that season with just 1 forced fumble. So pretty, not great. We saw from the overall, it's not like, this is not elite tier talent that we're talking about. We're not talking like, he's a Pro Bowl D tackle or anything, but very steady producer, and definitely was always present on that D line and getting the job done, doing exactly what we asked of him. Now, that being said, we have to take a look at what were they paying him to do that, and what would you expect out of that kind of contract? Where is he in the balance of things on that contract? So now we need to talk a little bit about the money here.
Let's do it. Let's talk money.
So they were due to pay him 13.67 mil for this season. Now, where is that in terms? So double digit millions. We're talking, where is that at in terms of the rest of the roster? Well, that's, I think it was the number 4 overall paid guy on the roster, behind OBJ and Landry. And I want to say, well, actually, no, Myles Garrett isn't even up to that level yet. So he's probably the number 3 guy getting paid on this roster. But so that's a big number right there for a guy that you're not necessarily getting that kind of money out of in production, because although he was very, very good, he certainly wasn't at an elite level. And a D tackle number wise, you really kind of want to get more into that high starter range to low elite level PFF ratings, production wise, for that kind of money. And he really wasn't quite hitting that. Plus, there's some other pieces and moves that came into play here for why that might have been or why that may have been. So the other side of that coin is, because of where he was at in his contract, only 1.67 of that 13.67 came, was what we call guaranteed money, or what you would consider a cap hit if he were to leave. So very low value that you have to continue to pay him if you get rid of him. So a lot of savings to be had if you release him at basically $12 million that you can now have money available. So this potentially is a big part of why they look to make this move. But it's kind of interesting to think about too, from the perspective of, this is the kind of move that and obviously, take this with a grain of salt, for the fact I'm not directly saying that this is going to be necessarily to that level of success, but this is the kind of thing that Bill Belichick likes to do, right? He identifies guys that maybe are still productive, that still can get it done on the field, that are a little bit older, but ideally identifies when they're start to break off on the back end of the production side, and when the contract in particular, really this is what I want to get at, is the contract value doesn't fit the production that's on the field. Identifying those guys, and that's what the Patriots have been masters at in the free agency world for years and years and years. And that's really where Belichick, the GM Belichick, gets probably his that's where he is at legendary status, because he's been a master for years and years and years at identifying those guys that will still get paid in free agency, will still go elsewhere and make big money because they were so successful with the Patriots. But it's that identification of where does that cap number or that money that we're going to be spending on this position really not match the production that's out on the field, and they're a little bit older, and maybe we can move on from these guys, even when it feels like it may not be the best move, but down the road it really, really shines as a, wow, they moved away from that guy at just the right time. I don't know that it's going to really play out to that level. It could. It certainly could. So we'll see what happens, and that's going to be one of my later points, that we're going to have to wait to see how this all pans out.
Sure. So just for instance here, as I'm looking at other defensive interior contracts, the only player who would have made more money than him at 13, who is over 30, is Cameron Hayward,
right?
Who's making 16.4. Everybody else who's in that range is 25, 26, 27. You got Aaron Donald at 22 a year, Fletcher Cox at 17 a year, DeForest Buckner at 21 a year, Chris Jones 20 a year. So I mean, you're talking about impact, game, season changing guys getting that level of money.
Right.
Um,
And he's of those names, he's definitely on the low end of the production. I mean,
right.
he's just not that he wasn't a good player for the Browns. I very much like Richardson, and I think that the Browns very much like Richardson. And a piece of what we need to talk about here is the locker room presence and the veteran presence that he
Sure.
provided, which I think was a huge part of this, and still went into this. I think it still went into this discussion and probably made
Mhm.
it harder than
Yeah.
otherwise would have been to move on from him. But at the same time, they're looking at this from from the perspective of, compared to some of these other guys that are at that
Right.
kind of numbers, what's his production at? Does it really match for what we need to do going forward?
Sure. Sure. And again, you said he was 46th overall in PFF. Is that right?
47th, yeah.
So the 46th, 7th, 5th, like all of these rated players in terms of the value of their contract, you're looking at like 2.5 a year, 5.5 a year, 3.7 a year, 1.7 a year. Like that's the level of paycheck that in terms of the 46th highest paid defensive tackle and things of that nature. So if you're looking at a true, if there is such a thing as an apples to apples comparison financially speaking, that kind of helps shed a little bit light on that. So
Because I think the goal here is kind of get an idea of what are they thinking with this move outside of just the pure numbers, because I think it goes beyond just because you can look at it from a financial, well, we're going to save, yeah, and I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the full discussion here, and kind of getting into the minds of AB and the staff as far as what are they trying to do. So first of all, I think it gives them kind of flexibility now and later. Gives them some cap flexibility right now with that 12 million that they're freeing up, and that comes into play in a couple areas where it's probably important. First of all, if you wanted to do something else in free agency, well, now you've got $12 million to go get that done with, right? That you wouldn't have had before, because we were getting really close to that number where, okay, you're only going to be able to sign your draft picks, and then either you have to make some cuts anyway, or you're going to have to do some of the cap gymnastics to mess with some contracts and do some things to make that work, because you're kind of right on skirting that line as it was, with about 10 or 11 million remaining, with about projected 8 or 9 million that you're going to have to spend on signing your rookies. So you're right on that borderline. So 12 million is some flexibility for making some moves, and that could be free agency still. There have Vegas just dropped Vegas just got their D tackle. I'm blanking on his name.
Maurice Hurst.
Yeah, Maurice Hurst. Thank you. So he's potentially out there, a target you could look at. There are some other folks that we that in the free agency market that are potential targets in that defensive tackle room. But also you could be looking at a trade. This opens up your opportunity for some trade moves possibly, or of course we're going to talk a little bit about, does this affect draft strategy or not? So there are some things that you can do from a flexibility piece, because of opening up a little bit of this cap space that allows for some of these free agency or trade moves as potential. That being said, another thing that it does for you that, you got to keep in mind, this front office, although fans are always very much in the right now for what this next season is going to be, this front office can't afford to think about the right now. And I think a lot of front offices make that mistake of, this season we have to address everything this season and then forget about the big picture of moving forward, right? Because you can't just think about this season. You got to think about the season after that and the season after that. And that's how some of these franchises that can get it done year in and year out are successful, is because they have a big picture approach, not just a right now approach. And the big picture approach to this, that gives you some advantages. And when you start to think about some of how they've got their cap set up, think about the fact that they've just introduced a whole bunch of void years with some of the contracts, 1-year deal, 2-year deals, where they've got some of these void years stacked. That's like credit card, right? Where you're basically building for future debts down the road that you then, because you can spread out what you're spreading out is effectively your guaranteed money up front, that signing bonus. You're spreading that out over the void years. Well, that still is due. You're just basically putting it on credit for future cap numbers down the road, is essentially how that works. Now that can be very successful if you plan for it. But as anybody who's ever had a credit card knows, if you don't plan for that, it can really bite you too. So you have to be very careful with how you plan for it. One of the things that this does is it puts you in a position where you're going to do something you've been doing all along, which is kind of continuing to roll over some cap. And if you don't make any other moves in free agency or trade, or so on, you potentially have a bunch of money that you can then roll over and have available to you to pay off the credit card, if you will, of those void years down the road. And now you've got some freedom to continue to pay the guys, because you still have the original cap space that you would have had in the next year, plus that rollover money you can dip into to paying down some of those credit card debts. And then you've got in the void years, so then you've got some, the money to pay the guys that you want available. Because remember, we still have to extend Baker, we still have to extend Ward, we still got to extend Chubb, we still got to extend Teller, and there's more guys out there, right, on this roster that we're going to want to keep, and they're going to be coming due. We got to have a plan in place to be able to pay all of these guys, right? So you're building out that rollover cap, and we have been building out this rollover cap to be ready and in a position to have the numbers available to make this all work, so that we can have the best possible product on the field, not just this year, next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and going on into the future, because that really is, that's how you build a franchise that has staying power, that can be relative and competitive for years, not just this year, right? And that potentially brings the opportunity to win not just one Super Bowl, but maybe we were talking about multiple possible Super Bowls, right? That would be awesome, and I would love to see that.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's how you win. That's how you build sustained success, which, as you said, is not this isn't something that we're used to as Browns fans.
That's right.
Even for those of us who were around in the mid 80s, it didn't. The NFL's a lot different than it was in the middle 80s. We'll just put it that way.
It sure is.
Free agency,
sure is.
Things like that. So that was kind of the last time the Browns had any amount of sustained success. So it's definitely new and foreign to us. That's like, yeah, this is what teams that are good for a long time do. And they do say goodbye to good players when they're still pretty good. And
that's what the Patriots,
maybe because there's a great player coming, or maybe that's because you can get that good player to come back later, which we might talk about. And, it's just, there are different ways to do it. And we just have never had we've never really had a competent front office in since the comeback, to really be like, I trust what they're doing,
That's right. Yeah. And exactly. No, that's exactly what the Patriots did for years. That's what the Ravens have done. That's what the Steelers have done. All these teams have had staying power in the NFL with really good records for years on end, and some Super Bowl appearances and or wins along the way.
Yep.
Guess what all of these teams are doing? They're doing this kind of stuff, the stuff that we are now finding ourselves doing. But the other thing I think I really wanted to talk to here, which you were just mentioning there, is pay very close attention to the timing, because I think the timing here is incredibly important. I think that may be the most telling thing, to kind of really, get a look under the hood of the, what is this front office thinking and what are they trying to do? Because the timing is critical because of a couple pieces and parts at play here as to when did they choose to release Sheldon Richardson. Theoretically, they could have done it earlier. Theoretically, they could have done it all the way up to like start of season, right? They don't have to cut him now. There was no like, this is the time that he has to be cut in order to prevent, savings or any of that other discussion strategy wise. There was no impetus to drive has to be cut right now, outside of some very key strategy things that I think that are at play here. So first of all, think about the timing in terms of when did it happen in relationship to other moves, right? It happened 2 days after we signed Jadeveon Clowney. So if we're going to kind of read the tea leaves there for what does that mean? Well, that means that suddenly now that we have Jadeveon Clowney on the team, kind of the new outlook for what the roles and snap counts projected for the season are going to be suddenly changes, right? Because they're expecting, and they literally in the press release come out and talk about him lining up over three techs, right? And kind of over in that three technique position, they're talking about putting him over guards, right? So what does that mean? That means now suddenly your production from a guy that was out there taking all these snaps is going to be reduced. Instead of having him out there for 920 snaps, you're projecting him probably taking maybe 3/4 of that, maybe 2/3 of that, whatever, some smaller percentage of the snaps, because he's not going to necessarily be the every down guy at that position anymore, because you have a Jadeveon Clowney that you're going to be moving, because of all this versatility that you brought in. And it's not just a Jadeveon Clowney, it's Tack McKinley. He can move to the inside. It's the fact that Miles, can bring brought in on the inside. So you got three edge rushers that all can line up over guards, and they can shift, and they will. And now the question is, well, who do you bring out of the lineup in order to make that happen? And if the answer for this coaching staff was, well, it's probably going to be Sheldon, then suddenly his that $13 million doesn't make much sense anymore, right? Because that's for sure starter money, right? If not, you're hoping he's going to be at least like in that Pro Bowl caliber range, like we were talking about earlier. So the snap count projection suddenly changed, especially with Jadeveon Clowney being brought into the regime. Also keep in mind about who they have. They brought in Malik Jackson, right? And in some ways you can look at him as a one-off, same kind of deal as what Sheldon was. He's almost a plug and play replacement, one for one, of production and type of player and what you can expect out of him. And they got him at a much, much, much more reasonable, dollar figure than they're going to be paying Sheldon. So if they're looking at him as a one-for-one replacement where you can have these other guys rotating and he's going to be taking the snaps that Sheldon, the ever down snaps that Sheldon might have been taking, now all of a sudden, well, where's the fit for Sheldon on that line if he's the much better value that you've got on that D line? Plus, I think that they have a lot of value set and earmarked on Jordan Elliott, because I think they expect him to take a big step forward. I think he is somebody that they really want to be more of a foundational piece going forward. That's why they spent that 3rd round pick on him. That's why he is, he is set up to be a much more future looking prospect. They think he's going to develop, and they think he's going to fill in very nicely as a starter for them in that front. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that actually pans out, but they obviously have high expectations for him and still think that he's the guy, because you don't make this kind of move if your future plans aren't set, right? If you're like, oh, well, we're not entirely sure that this is the guy, maybe you hold on to Sheldon for that year because you're like, well, we need to get a plan in place to kind of fill this in. But if you're pretty confident that your plan is in place for him going forward because you think that Elliott's that guy, then this kind of makes a little bit more sense. But the other piece of the timing that I think is really important to talk to here is, again, you didn't have to release him right after Clowney just because, signs, just because of a projection for snap counts, whatever. You could have held on to him. There's no harm, no foul from the franchise's perspective of, oh, well, we've got him under contract. There's no reason to get rid of him now, right? Except for one big thing. The big key here is the sooner you give him, right, to go, now that he's going to be a free agent, to go out and see what is available, to go talk to other teams, you're really doing him a favor at this point, saying, we're going to give you as much time as possible to go see what kind of, talk to teams, see what kind of opportunities are out there for you, go get some bids, play the market. Go find out what your worth is, what your value is, and hey, we're going to have an offer on the table for you, and if you want to come back, you're always welcome to it. But if you find something better elsewhere, go get it, man. And I think that's really, really important. First of all, I think it means that they left this at an amicable place. I don't think Sheldon feels like he's getting screwed here, right? I don't think he's this team didn't value me and they're just going to cut me, and they did it in a horrible way, like right before the season. So he's got no time and he's going to have to jump late into a training camp, or even worse, right into a preseason where he's got no training camp. He's trying to rapidly adjust to a new team. No, they're giving him all the time in the world. This is heart of the off season. Like, there's plenty of time before, we weren't even projected to be in OTAs yet. Not that anybody's going to really be doing OTAs, but we got training camp, we got preseason, we got plenty of time for him to adjust to a new team, find that team, whatever that's going to be. But it also sets them up in this great position to possibly bring him back on a more team friendly deal, because he likes Cleveland because they did right by him, giving them the time. He was already starting to feel, his tweet talked about, starting to feel like this was home. He was a veteran presence. You liked him in the locker room. He's a leadership guy. He was happy here. The Browns liked him, just not at that number. And potentially it sets the stage to still bring him back in, get him on a more value, team-friendly deal, and still feel like to him that you did right by him in the whole process.
Absolutely. Now, do you feel like, obviously we'll never know for sure, and it's just sort of semantics at this point, but do you feel like maybe they had that conversation first? Or like, Sheldon, we love you. We appreciate everything you've done. We value you at $5.5 million. So we can restructure today at $5.5 million and you can stay a Brown, or we can cut you and you can go see if you can do elsewhere, but you'll know that 5.5 is waiting if you want it.
No, actually, I do think that's part of the conversation. Absolutely. Okay. I think they probably went to him and said, hey, look, exactly like you're talking about. This is what we're projecting you for snap counts. Now we got Clowney on the roster. We really like you. We really like what you bring in this locker room. We think you are an important part of this team. But right now, with the way the contract is, it doesn't make sense for us. This is a business decision. Right. But that being said,
and none of the guys
your spot is waiting for you if you want it.
None of the guys
this number,
none of the guys in that room are the ones who gave him $13 million a year. So it's, what I mean? It's like Andrew Bray's like, hey, I didn't give you that number. Like, don't look at me, man. Like,
right.
Well, I'm going to tell you that this is what we can afford if you want to stay on the team. And he probably just said, I'll go see if I can get more,
Well, and I think that's what's important to note too, is the fact that they probably encouraged him, not that they don't want him, but they probably encouraged him to go test the market and see what he can get, because that's still in his best interest. Like from a financial and a family perspective, and that's doing right by the player and saying, you're a valued member of this community. Yes, we could have just gone in and messed with things as is and kind of put you in a position that would have been not so friendly, but we're choosing to do right by you. If you want to stay, we'll restructure right now. We'll have that conversation. Great. However, please go test the market, go find out what you're worth. And your spot here on the roster is insured if you want it at this number. Here it is. And I think that's the right thing to do. And I think they probably encouraged him to go test the market, because I think that's the best thing to do by the player. And if anything else, it's probably going to encourage him more so to come back, because he wants to be with a team. Most guys want to be with teams that are going to take care of him. And I think that's the right move. I think that's why you've seen, Hollywood Higgins come back, these 2 years in rows, because they've been very adamant about doing right by him. He's gone out and tested the market twice and come right back, because he knows that this team's going to take care of him.
Absolutely. Well, and part of that timing here, as we transition to our next point, is they're still 2 weeks out of the draft, the draft. And whether or not he can find that market value and make that decision before the draft, cool. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with it, but let's talk a little bit about draft strategy, as a result of losing a starting defensive tackle.
And I think the answer to that is it doesn't change a thing. Honestly, don't think it changes a thing on your draft strategy whatsoever. I think this has no impact. I don't see this as suddenly an area of need that, you're going to burn 26 on a D tackle, especially in a year that has, there are many analysts that are calling this the D tackle, the weakest position. The weakest position of this draft is the D tackle, especially up front. You would never take a flyer on a guy like Barmore out of Alabama at 26. I don't feel like, because that's a lot of value for a lot of if, right? Not a guarantee he's going to produce and be a plug and play type guy, which is what you want in that first round. You don't really know that right now. And that's too much risk. So no, I don't see them, changing their draft strategy. And the other thing that is beautiful about this particular draft is, yet again, this is a position that they might have already taken a guy at anyway, draft strategy wise, but they're going to wait until the position makes sense at a value that makes sense in the draft, right? They're going to wait until that third round, day 2, day 3, potentially value, that third, fourth round, maybe somewhere in there. And that's where some of those guys potentially make a lot more sense. Like your Tommy Togiai out of Ohio State may be a very much a value pick if he drops to you in a spot where you like him and it lines up on your board and you're like, there he is, let's go get him. That's a guy that you can build into a role and potentially can be a starter down the road. Doesn't have to be right now, but that's what you want in those third, fourth rounds. Not a he should be able to start on the outside corner right now, which is probably where they're still going to start this draft, potentially, unless there's somebody that they just can't pass up on, like maybe that's Rashard Bateman, or maybe that's JOK, or whoever that is.
Sure, we'll do a pre-draft video on our own as a separate thing. But yeah, and I know we've talked about it before. Kind of another piece of what makes Andrew Berry so brilliant is that in 2020 he looks at the 21 class and says it's going to be pretty weak in a couple of spots, like linebacker and defensive tackle. So what does he do in 2020? He takes a Jordan Elliott and a Jacob Phillips, who would both be top 3, top 4 at their position in the 2021 class. So in terms of saying, like, we're going to get real value here. And so maybe the fact, like, we need a D tackle. Well, you did get your D tackle. You got him last year. And Jordan Elliott would be I can't say a for sure first round pick, but he would be one of the top 3 D tackles taken off the board in this year's draft. If he was in this class. So that's just the brilliance
both
of Andrew
those guys. Yeah, no, I think both of those guys probably go in the second round this year. Yeah. And that's, look at the value. The value of that is huge, because we have those guys, except at way less cost, in draft capital, because we took them in a year where it made sense to take those guys at the spots that we did, because we couldn't pass up on the talent. And that's that best player available. That's how the really, really good GMs do it. And that's where you gotta be really impressed with what AB has done.
Well, and now they have a year in the weight program and the scheme, and before you need them to be a starter, you have some time to develop them. It's like, wait a minute, it's almost too good. It's almost too smart. We should all do it this way, rather than go into your thing. We didn't teach you anything yet, so.
Yep. So next level GM.
Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up. What do you? I know a lot of people want to stamp a grade on this thing. You said let's hold off on grading it. So let's wrap this Wrap this this cutting of Sheldon Richardson up with your final thoughts.
Yep. I think it is too early to grade this. Really, until we see what the rest of it is. I think this is too early to say that this is the move, right? This is not everything that AB is going to do at the D tackle position, whether that is there's going to be a trade coming, whether that is there's going to be a free agency signing, whether that is that they're going to use this draft or this cap space for rollover and void years in team building down the road. And they're very, very much happy and expecting, like we talked about, expecting production out of Elliott and out of Malik Jackson and out of Billings. It is too early to grade this. My initial impressions are that I think Browns fans are much too quick to panic. And I think that's just years and years and years of such poor management in the front office that it's kind of a Pavlovian conditioned response at this point. Absolutely, where they're just so used to being, oh no, what a terrible decision. Like, this is yet another Johnny Manziel type move. And you're like, but is it? Especially with the track record that this front office has established for themselves, being aggressive but yet patient, letting things come to them, and so thoughtful and so strategically sound, and obviously we don't have a full picture of everything that's going on there, because we only get what we can glean from reading between the lines of what's actually going on with the stats that are available to us and the information that is available to us. And we don't have that inside ear. Like, I don't have an insider, at the Browns facility in Berea telling me, hey, this is what they're thinking. Like, that doesn't happen. And that's actually yet another good sign about how good this front office is you're not hearing those kind of details, because there isn't that, that stuff is bred from conflict in the front office. And that's where, well, this guy is saying this, and this is why that's dumb, and blah, blah, blah. That happened for years with the Browns. So you had all kinds of insight into the juicy details, why, the Mary Kays of the world, reveled in Browns, Browns reporting, because that's how it was for years and years and years and years. And that's just not the thing anymore. And I think that's incredibly encouraging. And I think until we have the whole picture, we can really look back at what happened with this move. We can't make a sound grade on this yet. And I think once we are able to make that, my suspicion is the grade's probably going to be pretty high.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and just imagine a week from now, 2 weeks from now. I mean, hey, we just re-signed Sheldon Richardson for 3.5 a year. Like, then all of a sudden Andrew Berry is just a wizard. Like, you're getting the same exact player. You're getting those 50, those 50 pressures. You're getting that locker room guy, but you're getting him at a fraction of the cost. And so now maybe you have 10 more million to throw at Teller or Ward or whoever. So
yeah, I think Chubb is the guy that you really want to target on that list for.
Right.
Are you going to have the money to re-sign him? And he's so important to what this team does. Right. And he is like the definition of what the coaching staff wants, and just the model citizen, if you will, of just head down, working hard. He fits this team to a T. He is what this fan base expects, and he's like the full on, like, this is the guy we really want to sign. But we got the money to make sure that we can do it, right?
That might be another video for another day, because yes, analytics would tell you that you do not pay big money for running back because you can just go find another one. So. But you and I both think that he is worth it, so I'm sure they'll make it work. Because at the end of the day, in Andrew Berry we trust. That's a good way to sum it up.
That's right.
So anyway, we appreciate everybody being on. For Kit Nagy, for Phil Nagy, we'll get you back to your regularly scheduled programming at this time. But again, if you have any more comments or things you want to add to the conversation, just throw them in the comments. Or if you have other questions you want us to tackle, please do that as well. And again, in all of the descriptions of our videos, check out the link to our Discord page where we keep the chatter and the banter going at all times, not just when these videos or sim games happen. So, Kid, anything else, or should we get out of here?
No, let's get out of here.
All right, let's do it all. Let's do it the same way we always do, by saying, Go Browns!